The morning began like a sheet of glass, cold, smooth, and reflective enough to make Ethan Ward see himself and feel nothing at all. Beacon Hill still wore its quiet. Brick facades kept their secrets. The Charles-breathed mist that drifted like pale ribbon through the alleys. From the penthouse, the world looked arranged and obedient. Lights blinked in tidy rows. Traffic pulsed on schedule. His coffee, measured to the gram, hissed into the cup. The machine's tiny green diode stared back like an eye that never blinked. He stood at the window and watched the city he half-owned pretend to wake up without him. On his kitchen counter, an interview played on mute. Elon Musk talking about failure and persistence, captions whispering across the screen. Ethan didn't bother with sound. He didn't need more principles. He needed air. He slipped on a charcoal coat that cost more than most used cars and headed for the elevator. Outside, winter had already pushed its thumb against Boston's throat. The wind was a thin blade down, the spine. The first crust of ice freckled the edges of the bricks. Ethan let his driver take the morning off and walked, because walking felt like evidence he still had legs. Beacon Hill's narrow streets breathed a faint perfume of wood smoke and damp stone. He passed a woman dragging salt across her stoop, a jogger whose breath made private clouds, a student tucking her chin into a scarf, all of them rowing their small boats through the same gray sea. On Myrtle Street, a bakery's door stood open, coughing warm air and the breath of cinnamon into the cold. The sign over it had faded into the color of old postcards. Hale's Bread and Coffee, since 1954. The windows fogged in soft ovals where hands had wiped for a better look at the world. He stepped inside, and the bell above the door gave a small, hopeful chime. Heat took him by the shoulders and made a case to stay. Behind the counter, a broad-shouldered baker with flour in his gray hair looked up and smiled like he'd been expecting him all month. "First time here, son?" Ethan nodded. Words were expensive this early. "Sit," the man said, pouring coffee into a ceramic mug the weight of a small stone. "No rush." The coffee was not delicate. It was a shove back into the body, bitter. And honest. The kind of thing that didn't try to sell you anything. Ethan sat by the window. He watched the street through fogged glass, the city doing its slow shuffle toward noon. 10 minutes passed, and for once no one asked for him. No board decks, no numbers, no screens. A radio hissed softly from the back. Kitchen. News about rockets and factories. A brief mention of Musk's latest launch, trailing into weather. He stayed until the bowl of his chest felt slightly less empty. He left cash on the counter because names felt too intimate, slipped the black leather rectangle of his wallet back into his coat pocket, thanked the baker, and stepped outside where winter waited with its clean hands. The wind rose. Somewhere between the door and the curb, something loosened, just a small shift, the weight of leather sliding against lining. And then gravity did what it always does. The wallet fell and turned once on the wet sidewalk. He kept walking, unaware, as if a piece of his life hadn't rolled to a stop behind him. Hours later, the light thinned to the color of pewter. The rain came in needles that found seams and stitched the cold into every coat. Near the bakery door, a little girl stood as if deciding whether to knock on the sky. She was 7, maybe, with dark hair in a crooked braid and a coat that believed in autumn in a season that did not. Beside her, a boy leaned against her side, his face pinched and gray, lips washed to the blue of skim milk. His cough sounded like old paper tearing. She saw it first, the black glint of something out of place. The girl crouched, fingers already red from cold, and picked up the wallet. It was heavy. She opened it with care, like a book she might get in trouble for reading. Money waited there in polite stacks. Cards with embossed names, IDs with a photo of a man who could afford certainty. She swallowed. Hunger lives in the jaw. It climbed up her throat and pressed a little. The boy tugged at her sleeve. "Maybe there's food money," he whispered, eyes snagged on the bills the way eyes snag on fire. Her name was Ella. She looked from the wallet to the bakery to her brother's mouth. The rain had threaded his hair to his forehead. His cough shook him. Inside the glass, the baker moved between trays like a soft, competent engine. Ella thought about rules and about her mother's voice, which had been the kind of voice that puts blankets over winters. "You do right even when nobody sees," her mother used to say. But mothers sometimes leave and hunger doesn't. She slid out one bill, just one, a 20 gone shyly from the stack, and folded it so small it hid under her thumb. She stood there a long breath longer, throat tight with something like shame, but older. Then she dug through her pocket for the last page of a torn notebook, the kind with blue lines that tilt when your hands are shaking. Finding a stub of pencil, she pressed hard so the letters would show through the rain. "I'm sorry. My brother was hungry. I took one bill to buy bread. I'll pay you back someday." The words were not neat. The G's fell low like they were tired. The I's forgot their dots and then found them again. She placed the note on top of the bills as if laying a hand on a sleeping thing. She closed the wallet and held it to her chest like a book you aren't finished with but have to return. "Come on, Sam," she said softly. "We'll pay for the bread." Inside, the warmth startled their faces pink. The baker looked up and recognized a kind of careful in Ella, the way some kids move as if the floor remembers everything. She set the 20 on the counter and asked for a loaf. The baker wrapped it in paper with a string tied like a promise and slid 2 small rolls across besides. "For the walk," he said, as if it cost him nothing to pretend generosity had no price. Ella shook her head and pushed the loose roll back. "Just the loaf, please." When he asked about the wallet, she held it out with both hands, like the world's smallest ceremony. "It belongs to someone named Ethan Ward," she said. "Please give it back if he comes. And that 20 is for the bread, so I don't owe anybody anything." The baker took the wallet, and for a breath, nothing in the shop moved, except the clock's second hand, writing its slow, round sentence. "You're a good girl," he said, voice thick, but she was already outside, the doorbell tinting the air as the cold reached in again. Night set early, a lid on a pot. The city's lights came on like a flock startled into flight. Somewhere on the other side of town, Ethan reached for his pocket and found only the shape of absence. Irritation rose, then habit. He could cancel the cards in under a minute. He could replace the cash with a line of code. He could buy 3 more wallets in less time than it took to lose the first. He backtracked through meetings, corridors, the car, empty. A small, ridiculous panic bucked once in his chest. By the time he stepped into the bakery again, the bell on the door made a sound that felt like relief, pretending to be a chime. The baker looked up, and his smile broke into knowing. He reached beneath the counter and brought out the black leather like a magician returning a rabbit to the world. "This yours, son?" Ethan exhaled. "Yes. Thank you." He opened it, expecting nothing but the tidy accounting of recovered property. The bills were there. The cards sat with their smug little faces. And on top of them, a scrap of paper, soft at the folds, the pencil lines blurred where rain had wanted to erase them. "I'm sorry. My brother was hungry. I took one bill to buy bread. I'll pay you back someday." He read it once, felt it like a tap on the shoulder. Read it again, and it became a knock. The third time, it opened something, a door he didn't know his life kept bolted. The bakery blurred. For a moment, all the graphs and floors of glass and rooms full of affirmation emptied out like a tide going backward. Tears came without ceremony. Not the spectacular kind, the kind that simply arrive when a truth sits down and refuses to move. He slid the note back into the wallet as if it were the only thing of value he'd ever carried and looked up at the man behind the counter. Outside, rain stitched the dark to the pavement. Inside, warmth held its small line against the cold. Ethan cleared his throat, the sound awkward in a room that didn't need it. "Do you know who wrote this?" he asked. The baker glanced at the door as if the answer might blow back in with the wind. "A little girl," he said finally. "Came with a boy who's too thin and a cough I don't like. Paid for her bread, left the rest behind." Ethan closed his hand around the wallet. The leather felt different now, as if it had learned a new word. He nodded, but his mind had already stepped back into the winter, where a note in a child's hand had drawn a map he suddenly had to follow. Outside, Boston breathed its cold breath. He tucked the wallet into his coat and stepped into it, the bell's last chime folding shut behind him like the end of a prayer. The rain had given the city a sleepless shine, every streetlight trembling in its reflection. Ethan walked without direction, his thoughts louder than the sound of his shoes on the wet pavement. The note in his wallet, it was nothing more than a scrap of paper, yet it throbbed in his mind like an unanswered question. How could a child, starving and cold, resist what so many grown men could not? He'd built empires on data, prediction, control. But here was something unquantifiable, a moral equation that made no sense in numbers. He reached the corner where the bakery's sign swayed in the wind. Inside, the smell of baked bread clung to the air like memory. Mr. Hale, the baker, was wiping down the counter, his hands white with flour. Ethan hesitated at the door before stepping in. "They came in earlier," the baker said, as though he'd been expecting him. "A girl, about 7, had a little brother with her, quiet, polite, too polite." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Do you know where they went?" Mr. Hale shook his head. "No, but she said something strange when I tried to give her extra food. She said, 'I don't take what I can't pay for.'" Ethan pressed his hands against the counter, grounding himself in its solidity. That sentence echoed inside him like a sermon. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by people who took everything and owed nothing, not because they were evil, but because they could. He'd been one of them. "Do they come often?" Ethan asked. "Now and then. Kids like that don't have routines, just survival." The baker paused, then added quietly, "The little one's sick. You can hear it in his chest when he breathes." Ethan swallowed hard, the air in the bakery suddenly heavier. He reached into his coat and pulled out a card. "If they come back, call me, please, day or night." The baker nodded. "You really mean to find them?" "I don't think I have a choice," Ethan murmured, slipping the note from his wallet. "They found me first." Outside, the wind had grown teeth. Boston's skyline shimmered under the drizzle, but he didn't see glass and wealth anymore, just the outlines of stories hidden beneath it all. The note burned in his pocket, an ember that refused to die. He walked for hours, through Beacon Hill's cobblestone alleys, past shelters, through dim-lit stations where people huddled under old coats. The city smelled of salt, diesel, and desperation. Each corner held eyes that looked through him, untrusting, weary. For the first time, Ethan didn't turn away. He stopped at a small shelter on Tremont Street, its door painted the color of old hope. Inside, a volunteer named Mrs. Ramirez looked up from sorting blankets. Her hands were cracked, her smile patient. When Ethan showed her the note, she studied it closely, tracing the uneven letters with her fingertip. "Kids who write like this," she said softly. "They're careful. They've been hurt before. They spell every word like it's proof they exist." "Do you know her?" he asked. She sighed. "There are many like her. But if she's avoiding shelters, she's afraid. Maybe afraid of being separated from her brother." That thought struck him harder than he expected. He had spent years avoiding connection, priding himself on solitude, and here were 2 children clinging to it like oxygen. He thanked her, left a donation large enough to feed the place for a month, and stepped back into the cold. The streets grew quieter as night pressed down. Somewhere, a church bell marked the hour. Somewhere, laughter rose from a bar where the rich pretended their loneliness was choice. Ethan turned down toward the river, his breath sharp in the air. Beneath the Longfellow Bridge, the city's pulse slowed. Shadows stretched long, and the hum of passing cars above sounded like distant thunder. A man in a frayed coat was selling coffee from a dented thermos. When Ethan described the children, the man pointed toward the water. Little girl, little boy? Yeah, seen them once or twice. They sleep near the old bus shelter sometimes, if the cops don't chase them off. Ethan's chest tightened. Thank you. The man shrugged. You find them. Give 'em this. He handed Ethan a small roll, still warm from the thermos lid. They never take food from me, but maybe they'll take it from you. Ethan nodded, gripping the bread like it was something sacred. The wind came harder now, slanting the rain sideways. His shoes were soaked, his breath clouding in front of him. He could see the faint outline of the shelter ahead, half hidden beneath the bridge. But no movement, no sound. Just the wet concrete and the river whispering below. He stood there for a long moment, listening. The city behind him buzzed with life, but here there was only stillness, an emptiness that felt personal. He thought about the note again, those 7 words that had cracked open his perfect, sterile world. I'll pay you back someday. He whispered the words to the night, not as an echo, but as a prayer. Somewhere out there, a little girl believed she owed him something. But what she didn't know, what he didn't yet understand, was that she'd already given him more than he could ever repay. The next morning broke with the color of steel. Gray skies stretching over Boston, rain reduced to a mist that clung to the air like unfinished sorrow. Ethan hadn't slept. The note lay open on his desk, beside the untouched breakfast his assistant had left before retreating in confusion. Numbers blinked from the stock tickers across his phone screen, but for the first time in his life, they meant nothing. He picked up the note again, tracing the faded pencil marks with his thumb. Every smudge, every uneven curve of handwriting, felt alive, pulsing with the quiet strength of a child who still believed in doing right when the world had stopped being fair. He folded it carefully and slipped it back into his wallet, then stepped out into the morning air. The city was stirring. Coffee carts steaming, taxis sighing, and the usual blur of people trying to get somewhere they didn't want to be. But for Ethan, the world had slowed to one purpose. He started at the bakery. Mr. Hale had just opened shop, his apron dusted white as if he'd been baptized by flour. Still no sign? Ethan asked. Not since that night, the baker said quietly. Kids like that, sometimes they vanish for days. Then you see them again, thinner, quieter. Ethan looked around, his eyes scanning every shadowed corner outside. If she comes back, please, call me. Tell her I'm looking for her, not to punish her. To thank her. The baker nodded, seeing something new in the man's face. A kind of ache that didn't come from loss, but from awakening. Ethan walked toward the east side, where the city's polish cracked. The buildings grew shorter, the streets rougher, and the scent of bread gave way to the metallic breath of the subway vents. He passed doorways where blankets moved like breathing things. Every now and then, someone would glance up, measuring him, his expensive coat, his clean shoes. But his eyes weren't the eyes of someone above them anymore. He stopped often, asking, showing the note, describing the children. Most people shrugged, but a few pointed vaguely toward the bridge or the riverside shelters. At a small diner near Government Center, he met a waitress named June, her hair tied in a red scarf. When he showed her the note, she paused mid-motion, her eyes softening. "There's a girl who sometimes waits outside," she said. "Brown hair, little brother, doesn't beg, just watches. I gave them soup once. She said she couldn't take it unless she worked for it." Ethan's throat tightened. "When?" "3 days ago," June said. "She left when the police came. Kids like her, they know how to disappear." He left $100 under his untouched cup of coffee and stepped back into the rain. Each word, each clue, pulled him deeper into a part of the city he'd never seen, the part that lived between charity and survival. The skyline that once belonged to him now loomed like a stranger. By noon, his assistant called. "The investors are waiting for you," she said. "They need your input on the merger." Ethan stopped walking. "Tell them I'm unavailable." "For how long?" He looked down at the note in his hand. "Until I find her." The line went silent. He kept moving, asking questions, following faint trails. The day stretched into evening, and his reflection in shop windows no longer looked like a billionaire. It looked like a man stripped to his core. His coat was soaked, his hair clung to his forehead, and his shoes had gathered the dirt of streets he'd never cared to walk before. At dusk, he reached the old bridge again. The city lights shimmered in the water like fragments of something broken. A bus rumbled overhead, shaking dust loose from the iron beams. He stood under the arch, scanning the shadows. Nothing. Only the wind whispering through the cracks of concrete. Then, from behind a column, he noticed a small handprint smeared on the wall, faint but fresh. His pulse quickened. He knelt and found a piece of torn fabric nearby, the corner of a child's coat. He turned it over in his hand, the color dull and threadbare. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. He was close. The rain began again, soft and relentless. Ethan sank down onto the cold stone ledge, pulling the wallet from his pocket. He unfolded the note and read it aloud into the wind, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry. My brother was hungry. I took one bill to buy bread. I'll pay you back someday." He looked up at the city across the river, the skyscrapers that carried his name glowing like silent witnesses, and whispered, "You already did." The wind took his words and scattered them across the water, carrying them somewhere unseen. He stayed there long after the rain stopped, the note clutched in his hand, unaware that not far from where he sat, under the same bridge, two small hearts huddled together beneath a torn blanket, watching the same lights and wishing for a miracle that, unknowingly, was already searching for them. The storm that night was the kind of storm that stripped cities of their dignity. Rain clawed at rooftops, thunder rolled like the sound of old debts being collected, and the streets turned into rivers that swallowed reflections whole. Ethan Ward was out there, coat clinging to him, flashlight trembling in his hand. His driver had begged him to turn back hours ago, but Ethan couldn't. Not tonight. Not when something deep inside him whispered that he was close. He crossed under the Longfellow Bridge, where the light of his flashlight carved trembling circles through the dark. Every shadow looked like it might breathe. Every noise became a heartbeat. The smell of rust and wet concrete pressed close around him. He called out once, quietly, uncertainly, his own voice startling him in the emptiness. "Ella?" The name felt foreign in his mouth, but it carried warmth, like the start of a prayer. There was no answer. Then the beam of his light caught something small, a torn scrap of fabric fluttering from the corner of a concrete pillar. He knelt, fingers brushing against it. It was part of a coat, thin, faded brown. His chest tightened. He followed the faint trail of footprints smeared in mud until the flashlight caught the curve of two small shapes, tucked beneath a collapsed beam and a blanket that had long surrendered its battle with the cold. He froze. For a moment he couldn't breathe. The older child, Ella, lifted her head. Her face was pale and raw from the wind. Her brother's head was resting on her lap, his skin too white, lips trembling. Her voice came out small but sharp, edged with fear. "Who's there?" Ethan lowered the light immediately, raising both hands. "It's okay," he said gently, his breath visible in the freezing air. "My name's Ethan. I'm not here to hurt you." The girl narrowed her eyes, clutching the boy closer. "People say that before they do." "I know," he whispered. "I know they do." He took a slow step forward, the gravel crunching softly. "You left me a note once, remember? At the bakery." Her eyes widened just slightly, enough for him to see that she did. The boy in her arms stirred and coughed, a hollow, desperate sound that didn't belong in a child's throat. Ethan crouched low, his voice breaking. "That's your brother, isn't it, Sam?" She nodded, fear and exhaustion pulling at her face. "He's sick. Please don't call anyone. If they take us, they'll split us up." Ethan shook his head quickly. No one's taking you anywhere. I promise. But he needs help. Real help. Rain drummed harder against the bridge above, water running down the walls in trembling lines. Ethan shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around the two of them. The warmth that left his body was nothing compared to the quiet shiver of relief that passed through Ella's. I have a car just up the hill, he said softly. Let me take you somewhere warm. There's food, heat, doctors. You can rest. Both of you, she hesitated, clutching Sam closer. If you're lying. He met her eyes. Then I'll run with you, he said. I won't let anyone take you. The air between them stilled. Trust is a fragile thing. It doesn't announce itself. It just breathes once quietly and then exists. Ella gave a small nod. Ethan exhaled shakily, stepping closer. He lifted Sam carefully, feeling the burning heat through the boy's damp clothes. The child's head lolled against his shoulder. He weighed almost nothing. Ella followed close behind, her small hand gripping the edge of his coat as if she was afraid the world would swallow him too. They climbed the slippery stone steps together, the wind screaming above them. When they reached the street, Ethan's car waited, dark and sleek, utterly out of place in this world of cold and hunger. He opened the back door and gently placed Sam inside, wrapping him in the emergency blanket he kept in the trunk. Ella climbed in after him, refusing to let go of her brother's hand. As the engine started, warmth filled the car. Ethan looked at them in the rearview mirror, the billionaire and the two children who had taught him what money had never been able to buy. Hold on, he murmured. We're almost there. He called Dr. Patel on speaker. I need a pediatrician tonight, he said, his voice shaking. No questions. Just help. 15 minutes later, they pulled up to a small private clinic where lights glowed through rain-smeared windows. Nurses hurried to open the door, and Ethan carried Sam inside, his soaked shoes leaving ghostly prints on the floor. Ella stayed by her brother's side, refusing to let go even as the doctors worked. Oxygen mask hissing, machines humming, voices urgent but steady. Ethan stood outside the glass, drenched, trembling. Not from the cold, but from the enormity of what was happening. A stranger to compassion all his life, he was now watching it breathe right in front of him. When Dr. Patel finally stepped out, wiping his glasses, his tone softened. He's stable. Severe pneumonia. But you brought him just in time. Ethan let out a long, uneven breath. Behind him, Ella sat by the hospital bed, her small hand resting on Sam's chest. She looked up at him through the glass, eyes tired but shining with something fierce and pure. He realized then that the note she'd written wasn't a promise of repayment. It was a map, a way back to the person he'd forgotten how to be. He pressed a hand to the window, watching the faint rise and fall of the boy's chest, and whispered under his breath, "You've already paid me back." The storm finally broke by morning, leaving behind a pale sky bruised with dawn. The city was quiet, washed clean, as if Boston itself needed a moment to breathe. Inside the small clinic room, the hum of machines replaced the noise of the world. Sam lay beneath crisp white sheets, his breathing soft and steady now, a gentle rhythm against the silence. Beside him sat Ella, her hair tangled, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She hadn't slept all night, her small hand wrapped tightly around her brother's. Ethan stood by the window, still wearing the same soaked clothes from the night before. He looked out over the city, feeling the faint pulse of life beneath the skyline. The billionaire who once measured success by how many zeros followed a number was standing in a place where none of that mattered. The only currency that counted here was breath, warmth, and faith. Dr. Patel entered quietly, glancing over the chart before speaking. "He'll make it," he said. "You found them just in time. A day later and—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. Ethan nodded, voice low. "Thank you." Patel studied him for a long moment. "You look like a man who hasn't slept in years," he said softly. "Take care of yourself, too." Then he turned and left, closing the door behind him. Ethan turned toward the girl. She looked so small against the sterile white of the room, her thin frame swallowed by an oversized blanket. He walked over slowly, stopping a few feet away so he wouldn't startle her. "How's he feeling?" he asked. Ella glanced at her brother. "He's better now. The doctor said he's sleeping." Her voice was careful, polite, like she wasn't used to speaking freely. Ethan smiled faintly. "That's good." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the monitor filled the silence, the soft beep like a heartbeat reminding them both they were still here. Then Ella finally asked, "Why are you helping us?" Ethan hesitated. He could have said 100 things: charity, guilt, obligation, but none of them were true. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, unfolded the small piece of paper that had changed everything, and handed it to her. "Because of this," he said simply. Ella frowned, recognizing it instantly. "You found it." "I did," he said. "And it found me." Her small fingers brushed over the faded pencil marks. "I didn't think you'd ever read it," she whispered. "I did. More than once." His voice trembled. "I thought I understood life, Ella, but that note, it reminded me what honesty looks like. What courage feels like." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "I just didn't want to steal." "And that," Ethan said, "is the difference between surviving and living." The girl didn't understand all his words, but she heard the kindness in them. She nodded once, then looked back at her brother. "Will they make us leave?" she asked. Ethan crouched beside her, lowering his voice. "Not yet. You're safe here. And when he's better, you can stay with me for a while. My home is big, too big for one person." She studied his face for a long moment, trying to decide if she could trust him. Finally, she whispered, "You live in one of those tall buildings?" "Yes," Ethan said with a small smile. "Way up where the clouds touch the glass," her brow furrowed. "Do you ever get lonely up there?" He exhaled softly, surprised by the question. "Every day," he said. That afternoon, when Sam finally woke, Ethan was still there. He brought the boy a small cup of warm broth, spoon-feeding him patiently until he managed to smile. The smile was weak but real, the first spark of life returning. Hours passed in a kind of quiet peace. The snow outside had turned to light flakes, drifting lazily past the window. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel the need to check his phone or respond to an email. The world could wait. As evening approached, he stood by the door, watching the siblings sleep side by side. Ella's hand rested protectively on Sam's chest. Ethan felt something rise in him, a warmth he hadn't felt since childhood, something that had nothing to do with ownership or control. It was care. It was purpose. He whispered to the sleeping boy, "You saved me too, you know." Later, when he returned to his penthouse to shower and change, the silence hit differently. It was no longer comforting, it was unbearable. The polished marble floors, the glass walls, the perfect order, it all felt like a museum of loneliness. He walked through the vast living room, the city stretching beneath him, and realized how small it all was. That night, as the city lights flickered like distant stars, Ethan sat at his grand piano, a decoration he'd never learned to play, and rested the note on top of it. He stared at the words again, the child's handwriting trembling with both fear and faith. "I'm sorry. My brother was hungry. I took one bill to buy bread. I'll pay you back someday," Ethan whispered into the empty room. "You already did." And for the first time in a decade, he allowed himself to cry, not for what he'd lost, but for what he'd finally found. By the time Ethan brought Ella and Sam to his penthouse, the city had thawed from its storm. Boston's skyline shimmered through glass walls, towers glittering like frost suspended in the night. Yet inside the towering apartment, warmth flickered where there had never been any before. The elevator doors slid open with a hush. Ella stepped in first, holding her brother's hand. Her boots squeaked on the polished marble floor, and she froze. The vastness of it, the endless view, the silent air, was overwhelming. "You live here?" she whispered, almost afraid to disturb the stillness. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yes, but it's been too quiet for too long." Sam, still weak, coughed softly. Ethan motioned them toward a couch near the wide window overlooking the harbor. He fetched blankets from the guest room, thick and soft, wrapping the boy gently. Ella hovered near him, her small fingers clutching the edge of her sleeve as though she didn't trust anything that looked so perfect. "I can make something for you to eat," Ethan said, moving toward the kitchen. "What do you like?" Ella looked at him uncertainly. "Just bread," she said. He chuckled softly. "Bread I can do." The kitchen, all steel and stone, had never known the sound of laughter. Ethan rummaged through cupboards until he found what he needed. The first attempt at grilled cheese burned, a cloud of smoke curling into the air. Ella jumped at the sound of the fire alarm chirping, but Ethan laughed and waved it away. "Guess I'm out of practice." The second batch came out better, golden, crisp, melting in the middle. When he set the plate before them, Sam's eyes widened. The boy bit into the sandwich and smiled, a small, tired, perfect smile. Ella's shoulders eased for the first time that day. After dinner, Ethan turned on soft music, something slow and old. The notes filled the space like a heartbeat rediscovered. Sam dozed off on the couch, his breathing steady, while Ella sat beside him, sketching quietly on the back of a napkin with a pencil Ethan had found for her. "You draw?" he asked. She shrugged. "I used to before—" She didn't finish the sentence. Ethan didn't push. "You can draw here, as much as you want," she nodded. Then after a pause, she looked up at him. "Are we staying here forever?" He smiled sadly. "For as long as you need." That night, after they'd fallen asleep under a mountain of blankets, Ethan sat across from them, unable to look away. The two children lay huddled together like the world's smallest miracle. Outside, the harbor lights blinked like slow, patient stars. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel the weight of his empire pressing down on him. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, breathing with soft laughter and the sound of small hands turning pages of borrowed peace. In the days that followed, the penthouse changed. The sterile perfection gave way to warmth. A half-finished puzzle sat on the dining table. Crayon drawings covered the refrigerator. A pair of tiny boots stood by the door beside his polished leather shoes. Each morning, Ella woke before him to watch the sun rise, the golden light spilling through the glass walls. Sam's laughter began to fill the hallways. And somewhere between those mornings, Ethan felt something long forgotten bloom quietly in his chest. Joy. But peace rarely arrives without its shadow. A week later, as Ethan poured cocoa for the children, his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. "Mr. Ward?" said a voice on the other end, measured and polite. "This is James Brody, private investigator. You asked me to look into the children's background." Ethan froze. "Yes, I found something," the man said. "Their father, Daniel Grace. He was released from a correctional facility 6 months ago. Been looking for them ever since." The world seemed to narrow around Ethan's heartbeat. "He's alive?" "Yes, sir. He's been trying to reach social services. They filed missing children reports in Worcester County, but no leads. He's clean now, working at an auto shop. Has a record, yes, but he's trying." Ethan's hand trembled. The sound of Ella's laughter drifted from the next room, innocent, bright, unaware. After the call ended, he sat in silence, the cocoa cooling beside him. The truth weighed heavy. He had found them by chance, saved them from the cold, but they weren't his to keep. The realization sliced deep, not because it threatened his comfort, but because it touched something rawer, love. That night, as snow began to fall again, Ethan stood by the window, watching the flakes dissolve against the glass. Behind him, Ella had drawn another picture. 3 stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. Above them, she'd written one word in clumsy block letters: home. Ethan closed his eyes. Somewhere out there, another man, a broken man, was searching for this same light. He whispered to the city below, "If he's truly changed, I'll find him too." Because this time, Ethan Ward wasn't just a man who'd lost a wallet. He was a man who had found a purpose, and he wasn't ready to lose it again. The news of Daniel Grace stayed with Ethan through sleepless nights. He would find himself standing at the window long after the city went to bed, the skyline glimmering like a frozen ocean below. He kept hearing the investigator's words. He's been looking for them ever since. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ella's small hand in his, the way she smiled when Sam laughed, the way she whispered home like it was something she was still learning to believe in. He couldn't decide if telling her the truth would save her or break her. Days passed quietly. Ella and Sam had filled his penthouse with the kind of life it had never known. Crumbs on the counter, laughter echoing down hallways that had once felt like tombs. But that fragile peace had an expiration date. Ethan finally made the call. 2 mornings later, he sat across from Daniel Grace in a small courthouse conference room. Daniel's hands were rough, nails blackened with grease, his eyes the color of sleepless nights. He looked older than his years, haunted but sober, steady. When he spoke, his voice trembled but carried truth. "I lost everything," he said quietly. "Their mother got sick. I tried to get her medicine. Made the wrong choice. Spent 2 years paying for it. When I got out, they were gone. I've been looking ever since." Ethan listened in silence. The man wasn't what he expected. There was no anger, no pretense, just grief and resolve. "You should know," Ethan said slowly. "They're safe now. They're with me. But they still talk about you. Every night, she tells stories about her father fixing things that everyone else said were broken." Daniel's eyes glistened. "She remembers that?" She never forgot. The room fell quiet. Outside, a weak winter sun struggled through the blinds. Daniel rubbed his hands together, nervous. "I don't want to take them away from what's safe," he said. "But I need them to know I didn't give up." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Then come. See them." That afternoon, Daniel walked through Ethan's glass doors like a man stepping into another world. Ella was drawing by the window, Sam building a tower of blocks on the floor. When she turned and saw him, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Her eyes went wide. "Daddy?" she whispered. Daniel dropped to his knees, tears breaking free before words could form. "Hey, pumpkin," he choked out. "I found you." She ran to him, and the sound that came from her wasn't just crying. It was release. Years of fear melting in one fragile sob. Sam clung to his father's leg, laughing and crying at the same time. Ethan stood a few steps back, his vision blurred. He'd witnessed success in every form, launches, contracts, applause, but nothing like this. For a long time, no one spoke. There were only quiet human sounds, the kind that didn't belong to wealth or power. Just love remembering itself. Later, when the children were asleep, Daniel approached Ethan on the balcony. The city spread below, cold and magnificent. "You saved them," Daniel said softly. "I don't have the words." Ethan shook his head. "They saved me." "I can't repay you for this," Daniel said. "You don't have to." Ethan looked at him, really looked at him. A man who had failed but not surrendered. "Just don't let them feel lost again. Ever." Daniel nodded. "I won't, but the law would still demand a say." The next week, the courthouse filled with an uneasy tension. Social workers, attorneys, the quiet hum of bureaucracy, all trying to decide what was best for 2 small lives. Ella sat between the men she loved most, her tiny hands clutching theirs. The judge's voice cut through the room. "Mr. Ward, you've provided stability, safety, and care. Mr. Grace, you've demonstrated rehabilitation and intent to reunify with your children. The question is not who loves them more, but what serves their best interest." Ethan rose, his heart pounding. "They deserve both," he said quietly. "A father who's earned a second chance, and a place to feel safe until he's ready." Daniel looked at him in disbelief. The courtroom murmured. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Then you're proposing shared guardianship?" "Yes," Ethan said. "I've lived most of my life thinking love was possession. It isn't. It's letting go when it's right." The gavel came down gently. Shared guardianship approved. Ella squeezed both their hands, her voice trembling. "So, I get to keep both my dads?" Neither man could answer. They just nodded, tears shining in their eyes. When they walked out into the crisp afternoon light, the city felt different. The same skyline Ethan once saw as a monument to power now looked like 1,000 fragile hopes stitched together by human hearts. That night, back in his apartment, Ethan found the old note again. The edges were soft now, the words faint but eternal. "I'm sorry. My brother was hungry. I took one bill to buy bread. I'll pay you back someday." He smiled through tears, whispering into the quiet, "You already have." And somewhere deep inside, where emptiness used to live, something finally healed. Spring came quietly to Boston that year, arriving not with celebration, but with forgiveness. The ice along the Charles melted into liquid glass, and the city, once cold and merciless, seemed to breathe again. For the first time in months, Ethan woke not to silence, but to laughter drifting down the hallway. The scent of pancakes, burned on one side, perfect on the other, floated through the penthouse. He smiled. That used to be his job. In the kitchen, Ella stood on a stool, her braid messy, her sleeves rolled up, trying to flip a pancake that refused to obey. Sam, now strong and bright-eyed, sat at the table, legs swinging as he drew something on a scrap of paper. "You're supposed to wait before you turn it," he scolded. "I did wait," Ella said defensively. "The pancake's just mean." Ethan leaned on the doorway watching them. "That pancake never stood a chance," he said. Both children turned, smiling. "You're up late," Ella said. "For once, I had nothing important to wake up for," he replied. "Unless breakfast counts." She handed him the spatula, grinning. "Then it's your turn, Mr. Chef." Ethan flipped the pancake with a practiced motion, and the kids clapped like he'd just performed magic. The apartment filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. For months it had felt like a house waiting to be lived in. Now it was home. Later that morning, Daniel arrived, clean-shaven, wearing a blue work shirt with the logo of the garage where he'd earned a full-time position. He carried a box of pastries from his new neighborhood bakery. "Thought we'd trade your fancy croissants for something with sugar that sticks to your fingers," he said, laughing. Ethan smiled, shaking his hand firmly. "You look good, Daniel." "So do you," Daniel said. Happier. They sat outside on the terrace overlooking the city they both called home now. Ella and Sam ran circles around them, chasing the breeze. "I got the promotion," Daniel said quietly. "Health insurance. Steady pay. We moved into a real apartment. Windows, heat, everything." His voice softened. "Feels strange standing on solid ground again." Ethan nodded. "Strange can be good." Daniel looked at him for a moment, then said, "You could have fought me." "You could have kept them." Ethan shook his head. "They were never mine to keep. They just helped me remember what it means to be alive." The words landed between them, honest and heavy with gratitude. That afternoon, the four of them walked along the Charles River, the cherry blossoms trembling in the breeze. Sam ran ahead with his kite, its red tail snapping against the blue sky. Ella jogged behind him holding the spool. Daniel and Ethan followed slowly, watching as the kite climbed higher and higher until it looked like a flame floating against the clouds. "She used to draw those," Daniel said. "Kites, back when we didn't have enough paper for much else," she told me, Ethan said. "Said it was her way of dreaming, drawing things that could fly." Daniel smiled faintly. "I guess she finally got to." They reached the park bench near the fountain and sat in companionable quiet. Sam's laughter echoed across the water. Ella's hair caught the sunlight, flashing gold like a promise kept. Ethan reached into his jacket and unfolded the old note, now soft from being carried so many times. "You remember this?" he asked as Ella came running back, cheeks flushed from the wind. Her eyes widened. "You still have it?" "Always," he said. "But I think it's yours now. It started with you." She took the paper with both hands, staring at it like something holy. "I thought you'd thrown it away." "Never," he said. "It reminded me what honesty looks like when the world forgets it. You don't owe me anything anymore, Ella. You already paid me back 1,000 times over." She smiled shyly and tucked the note into her pocket. "Can I keep it forever?" Ethan nodded. "It was always yours." As the afternoon faded, Daniel packed up the kite and called to the children. Come on, time to head home. The word home no longer hurt Ethan, it healed him. It didn't mean walls or wealth anymore. It meant connection. It meant showing up. Daniel hesitated as he helped the kids into his car. You're part of this, you know, he said quietly. They'll always think of you that way. So will I, Ethan smiled. Then that's enough for me. When the car pulled away, he stayed on the curb, watching the red taillights dissolve into the amber glow of the city. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the hollow ache of loneliness. The night air carried laughter somewhere far off, and he realized it was still echoing in his chest. Back upstairs, he stood by the window, Boston glittering below like a living constellation. He thought about the note, the bridge, the storm, the children, the way kindness had unfolded, one choice at a time, until it rewrote all their lives. He whispered into the quiet. No act of kindness is ever wasted. The wind brushed softly against the glass, almost as if the city were answering back. And somewhere, far beyond the skyline, a little girl's handwriting, shaky but brave, had carried a message strong enough to turn a fortune into faith. It all began with one act of honesty, one hungry child, and one billionaire who learned that wealth means nothing until it's shared.